Hello, my name is Andy and I'm a ranger at Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie National Historical Park. Over my shoulder, you can see Fort Sumter at the entrance to Charleston Harbor. I want to tell you how these two forts played an essential part in the history of South Carolina and of our nation. Let us step back in time, where I will introduce you to 9-year-old Mary and what she experienced in December of the year 1860. Mary lived near Fort Moultrie with her parents. Her father was a soldier in the United States Army. He was among the 80 or so soldiers stationed here at Fort Moultrie with their new commander, Major Robert Anderson. Here, Mary listened as the adults talked about slavery, secession, and the new president-elect, Abraham Lincoln. Mary knew a little bit about slavery and could not imagine anything more horrible. It was just before Christmas when news came that South Carolina had seceded from the United States. Major Anderson and his men were ordered to defend all the U.S. Army forts in Charleston. At supper time, on the day after Christmas, the soldiers and their family members were told to quickly pack a few things and be ready to board a boat. They were going to leave Fort Moultrie, which was old and difficult to defend. Take only what you will need, was the order. The other families, along with Mary's family, met on the dock, where they boarded 2 boats prepared to take them to a safer fort out in the harbor. Everyone was very nervous, but they trusted Major Anderson to keep them safe. It was dark, and Mary was hungry and afraid. She cried to her mother, asking, "Why is it taking so long?" Here at Fort Sumter, the first boats of families had been unloaded. When the final boat arrived, it was Major Anderson in the American flag that had flown over Fort Moultrie. All of the soldiers and their families from Fort Moultrie were safe at Fort Sumter, or so they thought. The following day, Charlestonians saw smoke rising from Fort Moultrie, but no American flag. Just over the harbor, where no flag had flown before, they could now see a 20-foot by 36-foot American flag flying high over Fort Sumter. The South Carolina governor was furious. He called what Major Anderson had done an act of war. He sent officers to meet with Anderson, demanding that he remove his troops from Fort Sumter. Major Anderson refused. At Fort Sumter, everyone wondered how long would they be here and whether their food supplies would last. By late January 1861, to conserve the remaining food supplies, Major Anderson issued an order for the family members now living at Fort Sumter to make ready to leave the small island. Mary knew that her father would be staying, and it was a dangerous situation with the South Carolina troops building up in and around the harbor. The ship arrived on February 3rd. All of the women and children boarded after many hugs and tears. Mary cried too. Her father had told her to be good. As she waved goodbye to her father, she wondered, would she ever see him again? Mary and the rest of the family sailed to the safety of New York City. By April of 1861, 6 more states had seceded from the United States and joined South Carolina to form the Confederate States of America. Major Anderson and his men had been living at Fort Sumter for months. Food supplies were running very low. The Confederate Army controlled all of the forts surrounding Fort Sumter and even had patrol boats in the waters of the harbor. No supplies would be able to reach Fort Sumter now. Major Anderson refused the many requests to leave the fort and turn it over to Confederate troops. His orders were to protect this place. So they waited. Around 3:30 in the early morning hours of April 12, 1861, Major Anderson received a note from the commander of the Confederate troops in Charleston, General Beauregard. The note gave Anderson 2 choices: leave Fort Sumter, or the Confederate troops would open fire within 1 hour. Anderson refused to leave. Before the appointed hour of when the shelling would begin, Anderson inspected all that had been done to prepare his men and the unfinished fort for battle. And true to his word, at 4:30 a.m., General Beauregard ordered Confederate artillery to open fire from every position onto the fort. The citizens of Charleston stood along the shoreline and climbed atop buildings to watch the battle. One woman living in Charleston wrote in her diary that she could see the smoke and hear the shot from each gun. Her house shook with every explosion, even though the battle was taking place over 3 miles away. To conserve his ammunition, Major Anderson did not return fire until after sunrise that morning, and only allowed 6 cannons to fire at a time. On the second day of the battle, the the Confederate cannons began firing hot shot. Hot shot are cannonballs that have been heated red hot. When they hit their target, they start fires. By midday, the barracks were on fire. Major Anderson ordered his men to stop firing their cannons to save what little ammunition and gunpowder was left, and to focus on extinguishing the fires. The Confederate positions stopped their bombardment. They thought that Anderson was about to surrender. Confederate officers came out to the fort and met with Major Anderson. One officer said, "You have defended your flag nobly. You've done all that is possible, and General Beauregard wants this fighting to stop. What are your terms to turn over this fort and to leave?" Anderson gave the officers his terms, and they were agreed to. On April 14, 1861, Major Robert Anderson and his troops left Fort Sumter. They saluted the American flag one last time by firing 50 cannons in ceremonial salute before boarding a ferry boat. Once again, Major Anderson left with the American flag. Over 3,000 rounds were fired at Fort Sumter during the 34-hour battle. When the sound of cannon fire had stopped, news of Anderson's departure spread. The people of Charleston celebrated their first victory. The war started at Fort Sumter, became a war which ensured that the United States would be one nation, indivisible, and resulted in the freedom of over 4 million enslaved people. Now that you've learned about the start of the Civil War, we've gathered together some students your age that have some questions for you to think about.
Hi, I'm Eliza. If you had been Mary, how might have you felt if you had left Fort Moultrie for the boat trip to Fort Sumter?
Hello, I'm Foster. What would you have thought when you and your mother boarded a ship that was going to take you away from Fort Sumter?
Hi, I am Jamal. Imagine you are one of Major Anderson's men waiting quietly while cannon fire explodes inside the fort. What goes through your mind as you wait for morning?
Hi, I'm Max. Imagine you're a wealthy slave owner in Charleston watching the battle from a rooftop. How would you feel watching this battle, and why?
Hello, my name's Ingrid. Now imagine you are an enslaved person in Charleston. How would you feel watching this, and why?